Hello, everybody. This is Britt Paladino. I'm the PR director for Abiding Love Charities, and we are a charity that supports all aspects of the Adoption Triad post placement. Welcome to National Adoption Month. Our topic for today is toxic positivity as it relates to disenfranchised grief. I have my three colleagues with me here today. We have Julianne Richards, who represents our Birth Parent Support Program. We have Lizzie Alignamath, who represents our adoptive families, and Merlin Montesir, who represents our adoptee resources and support. We're going to talk today, we're going to have a frank conversation about disenfranchised grief and how it relates to toxic positivity. So if you don't know what disenfranchised grief is, because I didn't actually until I heard this term, it means when you have grief that you don't feel like you have a welcome space to process or share in. And I think we can all say from the three aspects of the adoption triad here, we've all experienced this in some way. Toxic positivity enters into that when we try to express disenfranchised grief and we immediately get redirected to a more positive outlook, meaning, oh, don't, let's not focus on this, let's focus on that instead, and how that does impact all aspects of the adopted triad, and how it can even be damaging sometimes in processing feelings and emotions and how we feel about our adoption story. So I'm going to have a series of questions. I'm going to ask the panel to respond and what their perspectives are on these topics. First, just like I said, I hadn't heard of the word disenfranchised grief before, but I did experience it quite a bit. Julian, I'll start with you first. What did you think when you first heard the term disenfranchised grief as it relates to adoption?
Well, I'm like you. I had to look it up, honestly, to get a very clear direction. But yeah, for birth mothers, I feel like in general, we are the ones making this beautiful choice, this decision, this plan for our child's life. And if we're the ones orchestrating it and choosing it, no one really understands that we are still sad about it. There's still a lot of loss. So I definitely felt quite a bit of that. I even had a friend who did not support the adoption plan because she thought I would regret it. And as soon as I showed even just the littlest bit of grief, she took that for regret. And she was just like, oh man, I knew you were going to regret this. You shouldn't have done it. I'm like, no, that's not what this is at all. I'm grieving, but it was
Yeah.
still the right choice. And so there's just not a lot of understanding. There's people outside the triad, they just aren't in it and they don't know how to relate. So it felt very isolated.
I think that's a good word, isolated. Merlin, what would you have to say about disenfranchised grief?
Right. So I was kind of familiar with the term for a little while, but when I did hear about it, I actually, it's interesting how Julianne said isolation. I found validation in the term. I love it when there are words that encompass how I feel and my experiences. And as adoptees, we are not allowed to grieve. What are we going to grieve about? I was adopted from Haiti, so I was taken out of a situation where I could have potentially been alive today or not been alive. And so just being able to say like, oh yeah, that sadness that I feel, that insecurities, all of that has a name. I started reading this book, well, listening to it on Audible. It's called Mother Hunger, and it's top notch so far. I haven't finished it, but it also kind of encompasses adoption, and it just talks about, if you've been through a trauma, placing a child for adoption, adoptees, adoptive parents, how we forever just long and hunger for our birth mothers, and that is just all encompassing and it's validating.
Indeed it is. Indeed it is. Lizzie, what would you have to say about disenfranchised grief? How does that relate to the adoptive family?
Yeah, I mean, like you guys said, I had to Google disenfranchised just to really feel like I could understand the term and what it means. But really, I mean, I look at it as just breaking down those rules about grief, because grief is not a one size fits all. I think it's very unique to the person. And for me, as far as my perspective as an adoptive mom, on my journey to becoming a parent, with, going through the adoption process, my husband and I, we experienced a failed adoption before our daughter. And it's a very unique failed adoption where we had the baby for almost 2 weeks before having to give him back. And for the longest time, I felt like I couldn't put words on to that kind of grief because it was such a specific type of grief. And I remember telling somebody, I'm like, it kind of feels like a death. I feel like this baby died because we were taking care of it and then we weren't anymore. And, October is the month of like infant loss and awareness. And I always felt like I could relate to that, but I couldn't. Like, I felt like there wasn't a spot for my type of grief. So I feel like with this conversation in the adoption world, because grief looks so different, like there is a place for that. And I feel like I've learned that just even in the last week or so, just, researching this and processing my own grief with it. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, the two things we can take away from this question are feelings of isolation, feeling validated when we realize, oh, there's a term that relates to how I feel, and then feeling like there's a space where I can do this finally, right? Finally, I can be somewhere where I can talk about this and people will let me do that, right? So let's talk about, we hear a lot about just in the culture, it's just a culture of toxic positivity, right? And that has many different tentacles, if you will. But let's talk about how this relates to disenfranchised grief in the adoption triad. Merlin, I'll start with you. What would you say about toxic positivity from an adoptee perspective?
I think toxic positivity is rampant within the adoption community. From an adoptee's point of view, I just know that I would always get, oh my goodness, you are so blessed. Look at you. Kind of like a pity, but I should be definitely grateful that, I'm not in Haiti. I'm still not in an orphanage. And that toxic positivity actually shuts down your voice and makes you feel invalidated. And yeah, I'm not, because the next question I kind of bring it in. So, but yeah, that was kind of it just keeps us silent. It keeps us silent.
Absolutely. Makes you feel like you don't have permission to speak, right? Julianne, what would you say about the culture of toxic positivity and as it relates to the birth mother side of the triad?
So I feel like in your support system that everyone is almost overcompensating. When they see you grieving, they revert back to, oh, but look at this family that you blessed, or they take the focus off of what you're truly feeling in the moment. So where the word validation just came up on the last round, I feel like this one is invalidation, because you can't be your true self if you don't have the people around you who want to support and who want to understand, even if they don't know how to do that. It's a matter of masking your true feelings, or feeling you shouldn't be feeling your feelings, but then you may be overly compensating. You might be in a place of complacency where you're just trying to get by, because no one there is really ready to help you dive in. And so it's almost like you're just wearing a mask to get through, to push to the next day. And then it never goes away because you're never actually dealing with it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Lizzie, what would you say about the toxic, culture and how that relates to the adoptive family?
I think the adoptive parents are the ones that can really get caught up in this, because we are the ones that are gaining in this situation. We're the ones that get this new baby, and we get all of the joy. And so it's easy for us to only see the positive things, the good things about the adoption, and completely ignore the loss that our child has just experienced, whether they know it yet or not. And so I feel as though as adoptive parents, like it is our job to recognize both sides of the joy and the grief that come with adoption. And it's our job to talk about that with our adoptive kids. I think if our kids grow up and they only see us talking about the positive things about their adoption, and they're not going to know, they're not going to want to come to you with those lost feelings one day. They're not going to feel like you're a safe space to bring those feelings to, because they're going to go, well, I'm going to hurt mom's feelings if I tell her that I miss my first mom, or she's just not going to take it the right way. And we need to be that safe place for our kids, for them to feel all of their emotions and all of that. So I definitely think it is easy for the adoptive families to get the most caught up in the toxic positivity when it comes to this.
Yes, you guys make some great points about how this, while saying some of these things, the motivation may be helping, right, someone process grief. In effect, what it ends up doing is just the opposite, shutting down the voice and feeling like I don't have a place, or I don't have a right to feel the way that I feel. And then, of course, not ignoring some of the other aspects of adoption that aren't always so happy, right? These are really great points, ladies. My next question is, what is one experience you have had with someone who wanted to redirect your grief about adoption to focus on something positive, and how did that make you feel? And Jillian, I'm going to start with you on this one.
So for me, I'm going to revert back to when I was pregnant. Nobody that knew me thought that this placing my child in an adoptive family was the right choice for me, because they were so concerned that I would regret it for the rest of my life, and that there was no way of knowing until after it was too late. And so I had a friend who was very verbal about this during the pregnancy. And the closer and closer I got to delivery, the more estranged our friendship became. So instead of being able to be there for me when I needed that support more than anything, we probably didn't talk for a couple of years even. And then when we did talk, she was also the one who, anytime grief came up, was kind of that, ooh, that's what I was worried about. I knew you were going to regret this. And I was like, having to educate the difference between grieving and regretting, and how that is so different, and letting her know that you can acknowledge the grief without letting me dwell in it. You can also spend too much time dwelling in the negative. So there's that balance you need to find between sitting in the negativity and the sadness and the bitter side of the story, and then a balance between the sweet side of the story, and finding that middle ground so you're able to move past. Because if you're in one or the other, there's not going to be progress. You really need to be able to transition between the highs and the lows, the bitter and the sweet, because adoption is all of those things. And so kind of educating my friend on what the difference was between grieving and regretting, she was able to then acknowledge what I was going through, offer support, even though she didn't understand exactly. And then assistance. Hey, can I pray for you? Is there anything you need from me? Things like that, where it's like, it may not be a tangible thing, but you're not letting me be complacent in my sadness, but you're not forcing my progress either. You're just meeting me where I'm at, and you're helping me move through it. That was really a breakthrough for us. And she's one of my best friends now, but there was a few tricky years in there. I'll say that for sure.
Absolutely. So finding the balance, right? Acknowledging both sides and being careful not to be in any one space on that balance too long, right? Merlin, what would you have to say about that? What has your personal experience been in a situation like this?
Yeah, I love how Julie mentioned about the different spaces. And I've always felt, when I speak to especially adoptive parents and adoptees as well, but that these two things, like you can have trauma and loss, but like you're losing one mother, but you're gaining another mother, and how these two things exist in one space, and how it's okay. I always felt that I had to, like, if I loved my biological mother. I could not love, like, how could I love my adoptive mom? And I felt like I had to pick. And so I just think that was a really great point, Julie. I always got the, like my sister and I growing up, we were just like attached at the hip. And I know that whenever I was out with her, especially, I experienced it a lot. And then especially being Black and living in America, there's this perception that, oh, my life is just wonderful, and so it just kind of kept things like, so if I would say anything or I'd explain something, it's just like, oh, well, what do you have to worry about? Your parents are white. And that was kind of like the underlying issue that I kind of felt that was there. So, but yeah, I think, and then also one more thing, I'm sorry. As a Haitian, and also an African American, and having white influences, there is a lot of grief. Like I grieve the loss of my culture, and thankfully I've been able to learn the language. I was able to be in Haiti and learn the culture, but there's still that grief. And I think there are just so many ways that adoptees grieve, not just grieving of their biological family, but just so many other things. And I think that's important for people to be aware of and keep that in mind.
I love it. I love it. It's important, right, to acknowledge the truth of what is and to be able to have that space and to teach people to let you have that space, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think adoptees are always going to say, no matter what, what were these things that I missed out on for a variety of reasons, and being able to say, that is something that I deal with, and have somebody say, why don't you talk to me about this? Lizzie, what would you say about a personal experience that you had where you were redirected?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, whenever I shared our story about our failed adoption, and then 6 weeks after having to give that first baby back, we got matched in place with our daughter. When I share that with people, it's very easy for them to say, "Oh, you wouldn't have your daughter though if you still had that first baby," and I knew that was true. I knew that, and I knew, there's a reason for why everything happens. But it was still like, okay, but I do still love and care about that baby, and those feelings for and love and attachment for him were very real. And so for the longest time, like, I felt like I had two babies. Like, in my heart, I was like, I have two babies, and only one's with me, but I feel like I have two that that I have that deep parental love for. And so, again, I know people mean well when they try to, spin it into this positive thing of, oh, but look at what you have now, and you wouldn't have that. But it's like, okay, but there's still this place for me to sit and be in the grief over the first baby, and recognize that. And I think people just are uncomfortable with uncomfortableness. They want to just glide on past it. And so, yeah, so I would say that that's something I experienced probably several times, more often than not.
Yeah.
You bring up some point just about, it seems to be an American cultural thing that they don't enjoy uncomfortable emotions, right? Why that is, I have no idea, but there seems to be, because I know, my husband comes from a Sicilian background, and they'll cry about everything, and they'll cry with you. But that is just something to keep in mind. Just, sometimes I think people don't know what to say, so they feel like they have to say something. And then sometimes really the best thing to say is nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hand someone some tissues and let them cry it out. Tell them, I don't know what to say and I don't understand, but I'm going to be here to let you have this
Right. That
space.
simple, I'm here for you, or I hear you.
Mhm.
Those are super helpful, because again, the isolation, when you feel like you don't have a place for your grief, other than internally, that's suffocating. But knowing that you have someone or some place to go with it, it's super reassuring.
Absolutely. Our last question, I think, is the best question, right? We've talked about these things and we've kind of highlighted the issues. But the last question is really probably, what do we want people to do with this information, right? So, what is some advice for someone helping another process adoption, loss, or grief that helps with them feeling welcome to have grief about their adoption journey. Just a couple words of advice from each. Lizzie, we'll start with you. What would be a word of advice if they're in a situation like this? How could they help someone like you in the future? Practical application.
Yeah, I mean, I think Julian hit the nail on the head as far as just being there. It's easy for us as humans to want to fix things and like, oh, that's not doing enough. I need to do more. But just being there and saying, hey, you're validated. What you feel. I maybe haven't experienced that before, but your feelings are totally validated. And something to remember too is like, in regards to a failed adoption or even miscarriages, like babies don't replace babies, like one doesn't replace another. Even if you have other kids, like the same goes for that. And so I think just finding that person that will let you kind of vent and cry and, like you said, be there for you, and allows you to sit in your grief and doesn't try to fix it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Merlin, what would you have your thoughts on practical application? How do we let someone like you have their space?
Well, I think what Lizzie said was very practical. Like a baby does not replace a baby. I mean, when you think about it in such like a lot that logical way, I don't know, it's very helpful. But I think for me, it's just more of like for adoptees and everybody else, but I'm speaking as an adoptee. Adoption just in general is a journey. And where you might feel as though you have mourned the loss of your biological family and you're in a good place, and then something, some time down the road something triggers you, and that's okay. And just know that it's a journey, it's an ebb and flow, and as long as you have your support system and people who love you. For instance, I did a like a I never got to lay my birth mother to rest, and that laid heavy on my heart for a long time. And I did not know that, and I did not know I had the agency to be able to do that. And so, with a close group of friends, I did, and that was just more of like acknowledging the loss, but being so present and enjoying where I'm at to right now. So just it's okay. That's my thing. It's okay. It's okay.
Sounds like a beautiful experience. I'm glad you got to have that. We'll wrap up with Julianne. Last thoughts.
My thought is that regardless of how positive adoption can be, there is loss involved. Full stop. End of sentence. Adoption is loss for someone in some way, in some form, at some point. So, understanding that and accepting it and acknowledging it is the first step. Don't try and push it away because you'll never get through it. Or if you're trying to help someone get through it, if you're pushing it away, you're completely missing the point. So, whoever you're trying to support, meet them where they're at. If they're, seriously depressed, meet them where they're at. If they're usually doing fine and today's just a hard day, meet them where they're at. Just go to them, accept them, love them, be there to offer assistance, but don't make them go at your pace. They can go at their own pace and just walk alongside them.
That sounds beautiful. Going at your own pace, not rushing people. Grief always takes much longer than the spectators want to believe that it should, right? Ladies, I want to thank you for your valuable insights. This was great. For those watching, for our friends on here, tune in all Adoption Month for our video series. If you would like to know more about our post-placement resources, you can find us at abidinglovecharities.org, and the URL will be in the comments. But thank you for listening, and stay tuned for more.